Hi, I'm Adam Geller, founder and CEO of Athena. Thanks for joining us for another PL Together Lounge Talk, joined today by Bob Lenz. He's the CEO of PBL Works. And if you're just catching up on this conversation, it's a continuation of one that we've already started. So make sure to watch the other video, which is available at pltogether.org. Bob, thanks so much for joining us again. Excited to kind of dive in a little bit more together about what does PBL really mean? Like, what does that look like? Like, I hear you telling me about it, but I want to know what that looks like. So let's start today with an example, like PBL in the time of coronavirus. What's an example of a topical real world project that somebody might be thinking about?
All right, sure, Adam. Well, as you know, a lot of people this time are doing a lot more cooking at home. And one project that we're going to be sharing with people through a free ebook, the 1st of June, all these projects you can, even families could do these, and teachers can even enrich them even more. This one I'll share with you is called, for right now, a working title, a quarantine cookbook, where the learner, and this can happen for early elementary, middle school, high school kids. You just change the expectations a little bit about what they're going to create. But the question is, what are the favorite recipes or meals of our family? And the student has an opportunity, or the learner, to look at their own family and where they're living, but then also reach out to other relatives, if possible, to find out what are their favorite recipes or things that they've been cooking during this time, or things that they look forward to cooking when they're not in a stay-in place. And they compile that list, and then with all the directions, and then they have to make some choices. Which of those recipes are they going to actually you're going to curate it and eventually publish it in something that can be shared beyond their home, with other members of the family, or maybe with people outside. And so any cookbook, you have to do the test kitchen. So they're going to have to choose which ones they're going to test out. They have to cook it and document the process, so they can include that in the piece, whether that be photos or video or just written. And then the final product, which can be shared online, is a cookbook that includes the curation, an introduction that explains, the context for their family, and why the recipes that were chosen, why they were chosen for that manner, and then a selection of those recipes that they can share with their family.
So, I mean, this sounds like a great arts and crafts project. No. But I guess, like take us to that conversation with the skeptical school leader or instructional coach who's talking with a teacher who's kind of taken this idea, or one similar that you've talked about. Take us to that next step. Like, so why is that learning? I mean, cookbook, cool, but where's the content and standards alignment? How do we know this is what students should really be doing right now?
So right now, and actually in what we described, we're not worried. Right now, I'll just be frank, we usually start with the standards, but right now our primary goal is engagement, and a focus on engaging in content areas, and especially on academic skills and what we call success skills, things like critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creativity.
So all those
solving.
success skills are probably the same ones that are in my official content standards. So, converting between metric and imperial units,
right.
that's the 7th grade math lesson. Now that can be part of my cookbook requirements for my middle schoolers.
Yes, exactly. So you could be looking at all the measurements and tying in the math. Those are the academic skills, but it's applying the math, not just learning it for a test.
Right, right.
The writing all has to be done to publishable quality. This is going to be shared at the very least with the family, and you don't send your abuela something that isn't been proofed and polished.
Right.
And so you have that piece. You also have the project planning of trying to think, like, you have to make some choices. So critical thinking, planning out which recipes I need to get all the materials and supplies for this, whether that be the cooking supplies or the ingredients. Then pulling that all together and taking all the pieces of the pictures in the test kitchen and then bringing it in together into a book, which is actually quite complex. It sounds fairly simple. Oh, a cute little quarantine cookbook, but you've taken maybe 5 to 10, and you can make the complexity get longer.
Mm.
Like for an older student, you might say, well, for a younger student, there's shorter recipes and there's 3 to 5. For an older student, you might have 5 to 10, 7 to 10 recipes. So you're really upping the complexity for them and the challenge of managing all of that, with the idea that they actually care about it because these are foods that they're interested in.
You know what I like about this is that in some respects it really challenges somebody who's listening to this example. Um, I was kind of play challenging you there, right? But like it really
Oh
challenges
yeah,
them to think like, okay, what are some of the real world ways to apply the the ideas that we say we value as an outcome of the education experience and translate that into a quote unquote project, but also that has that kind of relevancy and immediacy to the world around the students today. I mean, I think in some ways, the idea of making a cookbook and that it kind of pushes people a little bit is almost a little better, right? Because it's something you wouldn't expect. And yet, even just hearing you describe it, right? Like the publishing and the critical thinking, the project planning, those are all skills that we value in a workforce and in a productive set of teammates and colleagues. So why would we not want our education experience to drive that for students? I mean, I'm thinking about the idea of that cookbook and just remembering a misstep I made as a teacher, which was, remember my first year teaching, being really gung-ho that all my students were going to do science fair projects. And I gave them kind of like the plan or who knows what. And at the end of the time frame, not many had completed those science fair projects successfully, let's say. And that really was a reflection on me and the supports I needed to provide students on how to do that independent
right.
investigation. So I could imagine a very similar thing being true related to a cookbook project or really any other project-based learning. And that for teachers who are adapting to so much right now, but then adapting to project-based learning as well, there might be some things that they should potentially consider. So I'm curious, and I know this is an expansive world and people go to lots of big workshops on it, but if I'm a teacher, I'm listening to this, I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm ready to, dip 2 toes in the pool. Like, what should I be thinking about before I really jump in and start wading?
Well, I would suggest you go to our website for teachers, called my.pboworks.org. And even on our homepage, our regular homepage, pboworks.org, we've set up a microsite that has all kinds of resources for folks who are, it really is all about blending online and project-based learning. Blogs, some of the idea, like the cookbook idea is actually from a blog then we're taking that and now actually building some more information for teachers or families so they can use it. We have several projects that we're putting online that are basically built out most of the way for teachers, and we're rapidly working right now to adapt those and have tips for how you would do it online, and low tech or high tech, because not all kids have access to a lot of technology at home. A lot of guidance for teachers.
Mm.
We're piloting a project right now. It's a project we call, it's about sustainable futures for the environment. We're working with 50 teachers, and they're meeting with a coach in a webinar style every night before the next day, so that they're given all the materials so that they can facilitate the project, but they get some support in doing it. And that's really great for first-time teachers. We're waiting to see whether that resonates with the teachers, and we get very good results. And then the last one I would say is we're still holding PBL World in June. It's just going to be virtual. And so we've spent the last month or 6 weeks to a month, or almost two now, it's time flies while we're having fun at home, to take our workshops and put them online. So teachers now will have the opportunity, whether they're going as a school or individually, to do the PBL 101, which is now, as you can imagine, completely oriented to starting where a teacher, this would be a beginning teacher, they're not really sure about PBL. And it's not just PBL for in-person, of course, it's PBL in this distance learning environment. So there's lots of different places for people to get started. I always say, like, the key is you got to get started. Like, the only way, you become a good PBL facilitator and teacher is by facilitating project-based learning.
Mm. Well, I'm not the expert on implementing PBL, but I will add from that science fair debacle that I just mentioned before, I would advise people definitely think carefully about what process you're going to give your students before you just say, go do it. Because I can imagine if you just think about your
Oh
example
yeah.
before with the cookbook, right? Like if you said, okay, go make a cookbook, and you didn't have really detailed guidelines and expectations about how success would be defined and how they were going to make their way incrementally progressing towards success, the end product may not meet the standard that it needs to meet for it to have been a rich learning experience, and it would have trended otherwise toward the fun activity end of the spectrum.
Right.
I know last time we
Maybe
talked, you
for,
called it the dessert project, right? It was really
right.
fun, but maybe you didn't learn a lot.
Yeah, we think it's the main course, not the dessert. So you have to structure it. You're right. So like one of our gold standard teaching elements is managing activities, basically the scaffolding.
Uh-huh.
So how are you mapping backwards from the product, and the intellectually challenging question that's sustained, the inquiry is sustained, and the strategy of teaching and having kids practice giving feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So in your science fair project, which can be a sort of PBL like, if it's broken up, or even our recipe, each of those pieces, each part that I described, the students have instructions, they have work to do, and then they're given feedback. And then you keep monitoring the activities all through, so that you'll know the students, whether it's in person, online, that you have to give more support to, whether that be because of special needs or because of just the type of learner they are. The irony in it, sometimes the kids who struggle in traditional schooling really excel in a project-based environment. And the students who have found out how to do school really well can struggle at the beginning in a project-based experience, because they're used to, teacher tells me what the answer is, I memorize the answer, I give it back to the teacher, I'm good, keep moving on. But when the teacher is saying, hey, what do you think? You get to answer the question, and then you have to have evidence to back up, your assertion, which is a lot different and much more challenging.
Yeah, and then you get to the I don't know what's past the gold standard, but the gold standard with 2 stars maybe, where you teach the kids how to ask their own questions, right? Of course, which is really where we want all
Exactly.
students to get to. I'm thinking about some of the examples you described, and I can imagine that a mental blocker, if you will, for some folks might be, well, I hear a lot of technical this and technology that in what you're describing, and there's an equity and access issue here, and there's been a lot of, I want to make sure we acknowledge the pretty amazing efforts that school districts across the country, large and small, have been going through to try and shore up the technology that's at home. But the reality is that it is not equal, and not all students will have a computer or someone who can help them learn how to do those online research skills or whatever it might be, right? So I want to acknowledge that and then ask you, like, if you're someone who's thinking about PBL and maybe you're in a context that where those concerns are more acute, how do you think about this project-based learning in a world where you're learning offline, maybe in the real world around you at your home, but you may not have the benefit of what we think of as the resource of technology to answer a lot of those questions and do a lot of that research?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think as teachers are designing their learning, whether that be project based or any other learning, that sense of equity and really knowing their students is key, because you have to be designing learning that's actually going to be possible. And if they don't have access to technology, or somebody who um, is fluent in English at home, it's going to be a challenge in figuring that out. Sometimes I think it feels insurmountable. But if let's just go back to our recipe project, and if I was thinking about this and knowing the students that I had taught, and there was a lack of access to technology, there was folks that nobody really at home who could help in English, then maybe this project is going to be done in writing. It's going to be with paper and pen. You're still going to hold them to a high standard of production. I still have my poetry book that I wrote in the 5th grade. I wrote the poems, I made the book, I illustrated it, and I wrote it. And in it you'll see like parts where I erased, because my teacher, Mr. Cooper, came up and said, "Is that your best penmanship?" And I was like, "Yes, of course it is." And he's like, "Really?" I was like, "No, it's not." And so then I did it. So that poetry book was created with all kinds of stuff in my mom's closet, with wrapping paper, and we used cardboard and construction paper. And why not make it in Spanish? Because it can be shared with their family anyway. Let's say Spanish is the primary language. So this book's going to be in Spanish. And the teacher's going to have to figure out how they make sure that the Spanish is grammatically correct. Put that on the onus of the teacher as opposed to the student. Those are just, that just comes to my mind, but that's the type of adaptation when you know your students and you know them well, and and one of the great blessings of this in some ways is, I think, teachers are more aware of the home environment by which their students are living and coming to school with, and what resources or challenges and advantages or disadvantages that brings with them, in a way that they probably weren't. It was one of the things they probably always wanted to do and they knew it was important, but they have so much other thing. We make teachers do so much. So hopefully this is an opportunity for that type of real adaptation that takes into mind the challenges and the opportunities that kids have at home.
I like that word adaptation, and how you kind of talked about the need for the teacher, like the recipe book in Spanish, which yes, saying that the student could produce it in Spanish does create that extra hurdle for the teacher, but it really respects and values the nature of the project itself, which was creating a book for consumption within their family, which is a different context than when you're producing a cookbook for the 7th grade team that's going to be shared among the students in the team at school, where the primary language might be English. So I like that. I think also there was something in there that for me, it felt very relevant to even this conversation, which is, we shouldn't mistake the quality of the content for the polish of the content, right? So here we are, we're both in our home environs, yet, at least I think you're bringing some valuable stuff to this conversation. The fact that you're at home doesn't diminish the professional nature of the advice and perspective you have to offer. And so I think that's the same thing related to students, right? That sometimes the content and what they need to convey needs to be the best that they can do it in the circumstances, and they don't need to be producing a high glossy magazine and shipping it in. You wouldn't expect that. So why would you expect it to be typed up and formatted numbered bullets if they don't have a computer and printer at home? You
Right.
just have to kind of not overlay the content and the production values and equate them.
And I mean, if they're fortunate enough that they can be in contact with their students, either individually or small groups, that becomes part of the project. Like, what resources do you have at your home to produce the book?
Mm.
So now you've added a sense of critical thinking and problem solving for them. And it might be, I got paper and I got pens, I got coloring books, I have whatever I have, and that's what I'm going to use. And it becomes part of the proposal. Often, like in a project, you have kids write a proposal. Here's my proposal, whether it's individual or small group. This is the topic. This is what's going to be in it. This is the mode of communication I'm going to use. And this is where you mentioned that project-based learning just fits, I think, in our last conversation so well with this distance learning of a facilitation where you're together and you're apart. And you can really break the project up into those points. And then you have some opportunities to give kids individual feedback as well, or small group feedback it's very difficult in a classroom. If I was a teacher right now, if I was going to start my morning and we gave the team, the group, everything that they were going to do on the project wherever they were at, and then they got into their Zoom breakout rooms, we're going to idealize the technological access, and they do some brainstorming together, and then that's over, and they're going back into their individual homes to learn. I can make one-on-one appointments for 10, 15 minutes with every one of my kids, maybe even if it's 5, just to check in with them.
Yeah.
I mean, how often does that happen in school, that you get 5 minutes by yourself with your teacher and you're not in trouble?
It's funny that, suddenly we're taking a lot of the ways we would expect adults to interact in a collaborative workplace, and like waking up to the idea that maybe students would benefit from those too, which of course, we've been saying for some time, but because you can't, divide the day into 55-minute chunks suddenly, and then of course you have no agency to say anything about what happens in that student's learning. Suddenly, we have some new freedoms, right? Where I'm just thinking about, again, real world learning. When you do projects for quote unquote work, right? Or when teachers lesson plan, they don't lesson plan for the only 15 minutes they have in the day. They lesson plan until the lesson is done. And sometimes it takes 15 minutes and sometimes it takes 75 minutes. And the benefit of this approach, I mean, I think it really opens students up to being able to have that kind of coming together when possible, but then saying, if it takes you 4 hours to gather all these things or do the really nice writing, like that's okay. And it kind of gives them that freedom. And of course, we talk about student agency and student voice, like all those things come forward. But I do think that freedom, as long as it's defined for the students, can be so powerful in this context when they're probably feeling like so many of their freedoms have been taken away, right? They just get to stay at home all the time. Well, we're almost out of time. I want to ask you one final question. It's the extra credit question of the series as we're doing these talks. And that question is, what's something you've changed personally since all this has started and you've started working from home? A new routine, a new thing you're spending time on? Yeah, anything.
It's a great question. It was actually a similar check-in for a board committee meeting today. It's more of a reinstitution, but a deeper commitment to a mindfulness practice. So I'm an early riser, and it's a little harder to get up early during this time, but I continue that practice so that I can have some time with mindfulness, a lot of focus on gratitude and and experiencing loving kindness and spreading that through my practice. And it just grounds me. More journaling. I found myself when I started this thing, I would go on to these Zoom meetings, especially my first ones in the morning, and I was just really grumpy. I didn't like myself that way, and it's really it's brought me some balance. And so it's been a real gift to, have this time to be so consistent with it, because I've always aspired towards it. And it's now becoming, it's becoming a habit. And I don't think this is going to go away after we get to go back to whatever normal is going to be.
I've been hearing that a lot about the thing that people hope that they continue once we go back to whatever the back is.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. I know that educators out there are really going to value hearing from you. If you're interested in hearing more from Bob and his team, or learning more about PBL Works, that website is pblworks.org. Bob, thank you again so much for joining us and being part of PL Together.
Thanks, Adam. It was a lot of fun.